Awakening by Kate Chopin. The Awakening is the story of a young wife and mother going on a journey in an attempt to achieve independence. The young woman, Edna, spends her summer at the Grand Isle, and it is there she discovers that she is much more than someone's wife and someone's mother. She rebels against the social norms by breaking the barriers of society. While Edna thinks that she knows what she desires, including the love of Robert Lebrun, she eventually realizes that she will never be content with the life she has chosen and will always strive to expand her freedom. Edna's failure to find complete independence she desires results in her suicide, as it was the only aspect of her life she had complete control over.
Okay, wait. You're missing a lot of information. To start, we need to talk about the context that surrounded this book. The turn of the century was preceded by many different books that were attempting to change the way in which people looked at real life. There's more of an emphasis on realism and naturalism, that coming from people's new and changing understanding of humanity with what came to be Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species, which happened in 1859. There were more beliefs that humans were made to be different than what our society said that we were. There was more to life than even what the Bible foretold. There was more talking of sexuality, marriage, and an overall pessimistic view of humans as a whole. And though at the time these stories were not accepted, they would have an effect on those who wrote novels in the 20 to 30 years after their release. These novels, such as Tess of the D'Urbervilles and The Odd Woman by George Gissing, all had different images of what it meant to be human, what the world was like, or even what it meant to be a woman, presenting some ideas that humans are a species of impulse and reaction, and we are modeled from external factors, leaving us with little true free will at all. These ideas of naturalism and realism established the changes in the world that would make way for later books such as Kate Chopin's The Awakening, which provided a drastically different view than those of people who were reading the novel, and presented a new way to look at women, consciousness, and the nature of living as a whole.
But enough about the period, let's talk about the author. Kate Chopin was born February 8, 1850 in St. Louis, Missouri, to her parents Thomas O'Flaherty and Eliza Ferris. Her mother's side of the family had a very large French ancestry, so Chopin grew up learning both French and English, and became fluent in not only the language, but the cultures as well. Chopin stayed in St. Louis during the Civil War, and lost her father to a railroad accident, and her brother, who was fighting in the war for the Confederates, to typhoid fever. She continued on until age 19, when she met a man named Oscar Chopin. He was a wealthy man who had lived in Louisiana but moved to Europe to protect his family during the Civil War. They both hit it off and soon became married and traveled around the northern United States and parts of Europe until the Franco-Prussian War brought them back home, and Kate Chopin never went back. They lived in New Orleans for a while, where they had 6 children. In 1882, Oscar died of malaria, and Chopin had to raise the 6 children by herself as a 32-year-old widow. This is when she truly began her writing career with her first novel, At Fault, which introduced some of the ideas that she carried throughout her work, including The Awakening, such as being a woman and having to reconcile one's outward existence within one's inward life. For the next decade, Chopin created about 100 short stories, many becoming successful and printed in many magazines and news articles. She became well known and even had her short stories published together in their own book. Then, during 1897, the same year her grandmother died, she began The Awakening, which was published 2 years later. It was born into an onslaught of hate for its morbidness and sexuality. Later, on the day of August 20th, 1904, Chopin had a cerebral hemorrhage and died 2 days later on August 22nd, 1904, people at the time not appreciating the work she had done on The Awakening. Whereas today, it is considered beyond its time and discusses the contemporary issues women face in today's world.
Okay, now that we've set up who the author is and what the context of this book is, we can talk about the actual book. First of all, who's in it? This is Edna Pontier, the protagonist of the story. She is described as having quick and bright eyes and blonde brown hair. She's described as being more handsome than beautiful and not a mother woman. She's very fond of music, and when she hears some, she has images that evoke in her mind that give her a good and vivid imagination of what she's listening to. She dabbles in art but isn't necessarily the best at drawing and is married to Léonce Pontier, who she doesn't really love that much. She has 2 children but doesn't care for them at all really and kind of leaves them behind later on in the story. This is Robert Lebrun, a 26-year-old clean-shaved man who's young and rash and always attached to a damsel. He's interested in marrying women and considers these light-hearted pursuits, but he wishes they were taken seriously, especially that with Miss Pontier, who he loves and who she loves him back in return, even over her husband. He has a yearning to feel love and would even lead couples to the next event while trying to walk in between them. This is Adele Ratignolle, a 28-year-old woman with golden hair and sapphire blue eyes. She's quite fond of Miss Pontier, but they are actually polar opposites. Whereas Miss Pontier is not a mother woman, Miss Adele is a mother woman, the perfect mother woman, in fact, because she has a baby every 2 years. She cares for them so much, and she follows the Bible with all of her heart.
Now let's look at some themes. One of the major themes in the novella is identity. Edna begins the novella as a wife and mother. That was her identity and all that her life encompassed. As time went by, she went on a journey to rediscover herself in hopes of individuality and overall changing her identity. Edna goes through multiple different versions of herself, whether she is the mother, wife, or artist. She's constantly trying to find a label that allows her to live a free life. In the end, it seems to be that she desires a lack of identity more than anything else, as each label confines her to a social norm. Her suicide may be as a result that none of her identities fit in with her society. Another major theme is femininity. The majority of Edna's struggles stem directly from her gender and how she is treated because of it. Because the Victorian era was so sexist towards women, Edna was treated as if her only worth was as a wife or mother. The other women in the novella, such as Adele, embrace these roles and live them to the fullest. Edna, however, thrives from a different life away from her family where she is able to focus solely on her own growth. While Edna's feminist struggles ended in her own death, hopefully her innovation will help other women in the novella to also become awakened. Now on to symbols. Art becomes a symbol of both freedom and failure. It stated, Mrs. Pontellier had brought her sketching materials, which she sometimes dabbled with in an unprofessional way. She liked the dabbling. She felt in it a satisfaction of a kind which no other employment afforded her. It is through the process of trying to become an artist that Edna reaches the highest point in her awakening. Edna sees art as a way of self-expression and self-assertion.
Now, we can talk about what literary devices are used in the book. On page 15, Edna states, I feel this summer as if I were walking through the green meadow again, idly, aimlessly, unthinking, and unguided. This is an example of foreshadowing. By returning back to her childhood days in which she was unaware of who she was or what path she should take in life, Edna hints at how she feels in the present and how it will affect her future. Descriptors such as idly, aimlessly, unthinking, and unguided show how she is once again confused about how she fits in with her community and how will likely act on it. On page 23, Kate writes, just as one misses the sun on a cloudy day without having thought much about the sun when it was shining. This is a form of a simile. Edna's longing for Robert is shown as she compares him to the sun. By describing him as the center of her universe, she shows how she needs him in order to thrive and survive. Robert has shown a freedom she never deemed possible for herself. Without him, she is back to the lonely and confused life she has been living. Also, the comparison to the sun foreshadows her fate as she cannot live any life without Robert, possibly one of the factors leading her decision to commit suicide. And last but not least, we can talk about the big and main motif that happens in The Awakening. That one major and constant motif that plays throughout The Awakening is the image and usage of the sea and water. Throughout her life, Edna was unable to actually swim. During one summer, though, she tried to swim and was receiving lessons from many different people, when suddenly, one evening, she was just instantly able to swim. The water that she wades through and her ability to swim now is not just a physical interpretation of who she is, but a psychological and societal depiction as well. The water shows Edna's awakening to who she is and as an independent woman. Throughout her life, she has been taught by other people. It has been another hand guiding her, just as it was in her real life. She has been pressured and taught to act a certain way. that she needs to strive for certain things in her life, but when she came down to doing things on her own, she could swim, and she could live, feeling better off than she ever. Water was her awakening, not only in what she can physically do, but who she can be as a human being. It is her awakening even further than that in her final moments as she travels back to the sea to end her own life, now knowing that whatever she does cannot free her from her societal restrictions. The sea is her freedom, but also the further awakening in her that she can change who she is, but she cannot change her circumstance or the society around her.